Okay, welcome, Mike Holmes. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Summer's coming. Can't be better.
Okay, cool. Now I'll give a bit of context here. I've been really keen to have you join us, inverted commas, because it's just you and I. Normally we have a bit of a group doing this, but not today because it's because we're going to ask some hard questions and we don't have to be interrupted by questions that aren't hard and aren't controversial enough. So I thought it was appropriate that only the really loaded, controversial questions happen between you and I, so no one can interrupt and say, Anton, that's outrageous. Or Mike, can't agree with you, despite the fact that I've never coached a championship athlete before. So don't want any of that stuff to happen. So here goes, right? Mike Holmes, a little bit of background. Can you tell us who you are? 30 seconds.
I got my first national appointment in 1984, and I accompanied my first British team in 1985. 1986 was a milestone because it was the first ever World Junior Championships. And who should be there? Sotomayor. So,
oh, really?
Oh, yeah, well, it was a privilege to be on the team as a throws coach. I did actually witness Sotomayor winning the World Juniors, the first ever World Juniors in Athens in 1986. And then
wow.
I progressed to combined events, became a national coach for combined events. And one day a kid walked up to me at the track and said, Mike, can you help me in the high jump? And I said, oh, do I have to? Okay, you just go over there and do some strides and we'll get on with it. And before you know it, the guy had jumped to 25 as a 17-year-old for the British under-18 record, and I became the national coach in Britain for high jump up to the year 2000.
Fantastico. And yourself, Mike, you were a thrower back in the day?
Yeah, I learned my trade. I went around the country hanging off the coattails of some great throwers, and I learned my trade from these guys, and that's why I started in the gym as a young age. And I actually did weightlifting competitions under their guidance. But I learned a lot about plyometrics. The throwers were leading plyometrics in the country in those days, bizarrely, not jumpers. And I learned my weight training skills to a large degree, and I've hardly ever left a gym since those days.
Okay, that sounds good. Right. So, and for anyone who's watching the recording, Mike and I met in 1993, and it was very fortuitous because he helped me achieve good things as a junior and also as a senior, but mainly as a junior. When I jumped 221 as a 19-year-old, and ended up jumping 224. But obviously living in Ireland, Mike in Liverpool, weren't together all the time, but we collaborated for probably 5 or 6 years. Yeah, maybe 5. Yes, 6 years, at least 6 years, 7 years actually. So it was a good time, and it was probably the best time of my life in terms of living in Liverpool and experiencing what it was like to be an elite jumper. And just to be totally immersed in the whole environment was fantastic. And I met some great people and had a good time. So that was my background in Liverpool. Despite jumping with Manchester Sale Harriers, which is probably a sore point on the committee, we possibly had to duck a few questions there. But, you know, Liverpool's a good club as well. And Liverpool was a club where Steve Smith was their famous athlete back in the 90s, which was an attraction also to Mike and to that setup. One of the things we talked about in previous Zoom calls was the importance of a squad, like a hub for people to train together. And just because it's kind of led into that, and I know we have an agenda, but can we talk very briefly, or can I ask you, how important do you think it is to have a hub, like a group, as opposed to one or two individuals who just randomly meet up together, a squad?
It can work both ways. I mean, I did remember back in your day, I looked around the indoor training hall and I actually counted 10 2-meter high jumpers in the hall at the same time. So
Wow.
that was a really good environment. And when you're down, you get some help from your friends, and you aspire to be as good as the best in the group. And off track, it's really good to have a social group that is of like mind. So there's nothing bad to say about a group. And when you do have a successful center pin like Steve Smith, they come from far and wide. I mean, I got one lad who traveled over from South Africa. I got inquiries from Korea. So it can be a real draw when you've got something going on.
Yes, indeed. Well, I do remember Tyrone from South Africa. I think he lives in Australia now and up in Brisbane.
New Zealand.
Oh, he's in New Zealand. Yeah, okay, cool. You keep in touch with him, or is he in touch with you?
No, but another girl came up from down south to train with another of my sort of little starlets, Debbie Marty, who broke the British indoor record. She travelled up, met Tyrone, they married, and they're off in New Zealand together. And if it hadn't been for the Liverpool setup, that would have never happened. So it's a nice legacy.
Debbie Marty? Oh, she was a friend of Debbie Marty.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. Cool.
They came up to live in Liverpool.
Ah, right. And what was the girl's name from Canada? Lovely girl.
Oh, yeah. She was an interesting character. She's a world famous authoress now.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. She sells millions of books, and all credit to her.
What type of books?
I think they're fantasy kiddie stuff, but they're on the bestseller list in the USA. So
cool. Yeah, don't remember her name?
Yeah, it'll come to me.
Yeah, I go through the alphabet if I forget a name.
Not to be fair, so you know.
Oh, right, cool. Yeah, I've forgotten. I've forgotten her name.
Juanita May. Juanita May.
Yes. I remember Juanita. She was lovely. Fantastic. Okay, so I've got an agenda. Believe it or not, an agenda. That sounds semi-organized. Here we go. You ready? This is big.
Yeah. Go.
Number one, fundamentals of I've mentioned. Well, what I've written it as is the fundamentals of high jump conditioning, including strength and conditioning. Now, I know we could talk about this for about 7 hours alone. Fundamentals of high jump conditioning. But if I came from Mars scenario, and I had no idea, and I'm like, oh, high jump, that sounds like a cool event. Let's try some high jump. Once upon a time, you asked me, you said, Anton, write down the 10, ingredients of high jump training, and then next step, prioritize them, right? You remember that exercise?
Yeah.
Yes, cool. So I'm from Mars, I'm an alien, and you're, the world's representative in high jump coaching. What's involved in terms of the Pareto principle, most important priorities, but also if you were to say, focus on 4 or 5 ingredients of training, what are those ingredients? What's the bread and butter?
Well, let's start with the fact that high jump is a rather unique event because you can go an awful long way without doing any plyometrics. You can go an awful long way without visiting a gym, but there is a ceiling. I mean, there's a lot of people, and you had a Zoom call with Stefan Holmes, and it was really interesting because he achieved 221 as a junior, and he didn't really embark on the conventional high jump work until he was about 20, age 20. He'd already jumped 221. And then he went on a mission to go from the ceiling that he'd hit by relying on natural talent. And he spent 7 years working conventionally on high jump plyometrics and strength training and achieved 240, and that's a remarkable 19 centimeter gain, having gone natural, if you like, up to the age of 20 and achieved 221. Now, I remember when I was national coach for high jump in Britain, there were a lot of people achieving internationals at 19, 20 without ever having stepped in a gym, and that took them a long way. But if you want to go all the way, then you have to sort of do what Stefan Holm did. He devoted his life later on to high jump, as you know from your Zoom. And 7 years later, he did 240. Now, if you look at Sotomayor, he's different. You had him on. He's very different, but there are similarities in that he started going in the gym at 14. And I think conventionally with the Cubans, he did a lot of plyometrics and a lot of weight training. And by the time he was 21, he had done 244. And the connection with Stefan Holm is that that was 7 years on from embarking on his strength training and conventional plyometric program. So he accelerated his progress, I reckon. And he virtually, I know he did 245 eventually, but at 2021, he'd more or less hit the top of his potential. Whereas Stefan Holm hit his at 27, but they both had this 7-year progress from starting in conventional weight training, plyometrics and that kind of stuff. They both had this 7-year span, which took them beyond the natural ability, and they reached their potential. And I could reference Katarina Johnson-Thompson. She started going in the gym at 16, and at 19, she did a 189 in the London Olympics for a PB. But 4 years later, she did 198 for the current British record. So from 16 to 23, that's another 7-year span of conventional plyometrics, strength training. But without that, you can still go an awful long way. So I can see why people achieve a lot and they question the need to go in and do conventional strength training because they've achieved so much without it. But they hit a ceiling. And if you want to go through the ceiling and hit the roof, you have to then eventually embrace the work in the gym and the plyometric kind of work.
Excellent. Now, I'm not going to mention the fact that your idioms contradicted each other by going through the ceiling and hitting a roof, but let's just leave that aside. As a former English teacher, I had to point that one out. Go through the ceiling, yeah?
Yeah.
Too late for you to get that humor. Mike, we need a smile. You're not allowed to do this unless you smile, right? But I got it for viewers out there who are watching this. It's really late where Mike is, so way past his bedtime, and he's agreed to do this kindly for $10,000. So thank you very much, Mike. We're going to raise that money through crowdfunding and get it to you before 2045, just to mark the 45 of the 245 world record. Next thing we had on the agenda was the how to run a bend, right? Very, very tricky because obviously you're going to be out of balance, and you know, if you shift your hips one way or the other, your head, you know, you could lose your balance completely and fall over, or you know, fall into the bend or out of the bend or whatever. And a lot of people in the Zoom calls were asking about the bend running and you know how you improve it, etc., etc. What's your take on that?
Well, the human being wasn't designed to run fast around a bend. We are designed to move in straight lines, walking and running. Now, the flop event demands a bend, a curve. So there are a lot of people who, in high jump, try and avoid running the curve. They either fight against it or they find a way of ruining it. There are two ways of ruining a curve. One is to come off early before you get your break point. So there's no real curve. It's more like the shape of a slack banana. And that's one way of dealing with the fact you don't want to run a curve. And the other way of avoiding a curve is to penetrate down to your break point, but then turn abruptly and make a corner. And so you've got a straight line followed by a straight line. And that ruins the whole purpose of the flop. So how do you run a curve? Well, basically, you just got to do a lot of curve running, get people running around in circles. And you can put cones out or whatever, but it is an unnatural thing to do because there's a lot of forces through the ankles. The top jumpers are running at such a speed that to balance out the forces, they're at 45 degrees of the vertical. That is not a natural situation. So a lot of jumpers, as I say, they find a way of avoiding the issue. But the only way you're going to learn is by running around in circles, and you can adopt any drill you like, but it's got to involve running fast, round in circles. And you see them doing it. You see people doing run rounds around the bar, but you can just set cones out and do it. But it's not surprising that people were, they resist it, but it's absolutely and utterly essential.
Bend running, yeah, should be built in off season, on season, throughout the year, maybe.
I think once you've got it, you've got it. But it's the novices that have the problem, mostly. If you are running fast, you cannot accommodate high jump unless you're leaning away from the bar, and you can only lean away from the bar when you're balancing out of centrifugal forces with a lean in towards the curve. So, another way, I suppose, of avoiding the issue is by not running fast. And athletes might be relatively slow jumpers, and that way they don't have to lean, and they make the curve a lot easier for themselves. But ultimately, the faster you run, as long as you can accommodate the speed with all the necessary plant angles and long plant stride and all that, you will go higher. So ultimately, for a high jumper, you should really be looking to progress the speed of approach and acceleration onto the plant. And you can only do that if you can run a good curve and balance out the forces.
Imagining you're going from a 9-stride approach, Mike, does the acceleration happen into the curve, or at the beginning of the curve, or through the curve?
Well, I take the view that every stride has to have a purpose. Now, you can jump world-class performances off a 9-stride, static 9-stride, or you can have a roll-on to 9, or you can have a static 11. It doesn't really matter, as long as when you're coaching, you see that every stride has a value. If it doesn't have a value, you're just wasting time. And you should really, it should be seamless. I mean, you don't want to see when the athlete puts in the effort, because each stride has got to progress a bit like a drum roll. So you don't want to see a surge at any point, and it's got to be smooth. So when you put the acceleration in, I mean, it starts with stride 1 because you're progressing right through the run, and you don't want to see any kind of surge or effort coming in. It should be continuous from the back. Obviously, you don't want to set off the back like someone's fired you out of a cannon. So make every stride have a value and make it progressive and smooth and seamless.
Good. Well done. Yeah, I mean, we could probably talk about that a bit more, but it's a bit of a boring topic because you're effectively just running around the bend, but it's very, very difficult to do. There's probably some novel drills you could do, but yeah, running around a bend is running around a bend, I guess. I'm not sure if there's much you can do to strengthen your ankles. I mean, would you suggest, ankle weights, or, even those body weights, the weighted vests or anything? Is there anything that you think might help with the strength of your ankles in particular to get around the bend?
And the conventional thing is a wobble board.
Wobble board?
Yeah, one-footed on the wobble board. And then when you can accommodate that, get some sort of masochistic coach to throw a 7-kilo medicine ball at you, right and left, and stay on the wobble board.
Get the old proprioceptors going.
Yeah. I mean, sand drills are good as well. A lot of people walk through sand and flick the sand left and right, stuff like that.
Cool.
But I think if you will strengthen through plyometrics and through high jumping, you will naturally progress ankle strength, I think.
Double arm shift, Mike. What's your view on the double arm shift? Yay or nay? And do you think it's something that needs to be done very, very early in their jumping life? Or is it something that for some is insurmountable. And lastly, if you were a 19-year-old high jumper, you'd never done double arm shift, you were about to enter senior championship standard, maybe you were a 220 jumper or something, and you think, you know what, I think I'd like to do a double arm shift. You think it's worth writing off a whole damn year just to get it right? I mean, just saying, no, I'm not even going to compete this year. I'm just going to work on my double arm shift. I mean, is it that important, or what's your view?
Right. Well, let's take it back to kind of square one. If you ask anyone to stand in front of you and jump as high as they can, they will use both arms. A youngster, anybody, it doesn't matter who it is, they will use both arms, say, right, stand and jump as high as you can. Both arms will be brought into play. The arms are a lift component, like the free knee. The inside knee is a lift component. And a lot of people, most high jumpers I find in Britain don't have a policy when it comes to the use of the arms. And there's three basic ways of using the arms. One is to raise it in advance of the jump, and I call that a leading arm. You can see people coming around and they raise the inside arm. Now that can't add to the lift, because when you come around, the arm is already in place. So it's not adding to lift, but it is making you tall. So that's the option one, and I think that's probably the least effective in terms of lift off the ground. And then using the inside arm to lift with is option number two. And if you use it and coordinate it with a free knee, you will get lift through the floor by using that arm. And it follows, therefore, that if you use both arms, you're going to get more lift than the other two options. So there's no doubt in my mind, and looking at a lot of the 240 kind of jumpers, they're employing a double arm shift, and they're not doing it for fun. They're doing it because it's effective. And you will get more lift off the floor with a double arm shift than if you don't use a single arm shift or a leading arm. So trying to build that in when you jumped, say, 3, 4, 5 years without doing that is very disruptive. I think we've had a chat about this before. I tried with Steve Smith when it dawned on me just how valuable this was. We tried to build it in, and I think it was the sort of age you're talking about, age 19. And it was so disruptive, it ruined the whole flow and his feeling for the event. And we abandoned it straight away because it was too late for him. And I think you might have dabbled with it as well. There comes a point where, you know, the way you jump is grained in. You can alter some stuff technically, but a double arm shift, the preparation for it is so different to anything that you've done in the past. There's a good chance. I mean, you might make a project of it, spend a winter at it, and maybe sacrifice it and maybe get it. But the answer is to start people off, possible day one, using a double arm shift. And
wow, that's interesting.
Late, you're causing yourself problems.
Well, look, in little athletics down here in Australia, they do scissors a lot. Yeah, the tall scissors. They're not allowed to jump on flop until they're like 10 or something. But
scissors drives me nuts because it's a running action, right? And you run off the floor a bit like a long jumper. Your arms are going alternate with your legs. And there's no way that you can learn how to use your arms in high jump if you're doing a scissors. That's one of the big drawbacks of scissors, in my view, because your arms are moving right, left, and the kicking scissor action bears no relation whatsoever to the flop. And I know the safety element, you know, you don't want kids taking off and landing on the upper back and on their necks, but the scissors is one of the poorest ways of developing the use of arms in high jump that you can imagine.
Good to hear. So in an ideal world, that let's imagine you were to invent this world as an alternative to the traditional scissors kick, would you introduce something like a double arm shift drill? Maybe not a proper high jump, but something involving a run, double arm shift jump scenario. Could you imagine that?
Yeah. One of the favorite drills for double arm shift is putting out a set of hurdles. You'll soon find the spacing, but you do 3 steps between. So you pop your free knee over the side of the hurdle, a bit like doing a lead leg drill for a hurdler down the side. So you go 1, 2, 3, pop over with a double arm shift and getting the free knee up. 1, 2, 3, repeat 1, 2, 3. So you can put out 6 hurdles and go down the side and just do 3 steps between and do just a pop up, free knee, double arm, and the job is good. Or you can, in Wavertree where you used to train indoors, there was a fire exit sign, and I used to get the athletes to run around and try and get their elbow up to the fire exit sign set at about 8 feet. So that's not actually jumping. It's not jumping over a bar. It's just off of sort of 4-stride, 5-stride approach. But it just drills in the idea that when you take off, the arms are used. And I would say that it's crucial when you do the arm shift that the hands stay within the line of the shoulders. You don't want the hands traveling outside the line of the shoulder because that creates lateral forces when you're actually trying to go vertical. So the double arm shift, if it's executed well, the elbows come to ear level and the hand stays within the shoulder for a right foot takeoff. As soon as the hand strays out, you're causing other problems, which we may be able to get into later. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you can't, in using a double arm shift or any arm work, you can't, the takeoff is so short, you can't extend your hand high above your head. You're just trying to get your elbow high. It takes the shoulder with it. The hand doesn't have to go high. Just get the elbow to ear level. And so it looks like that.
Right. But before they do the double arm shift, it looks, it's way back here. It looks quite dramatic. If you take a photograph from behind, like the ones you've shared with me, happy to share them in the forum, you got this incredibly exaggerated action, like a guy jumping off a ski ramp, downhill skiing, or ski jumps. But it looks like a ski jump posture, doesn't it? Like with the arms behind them, ready to propel. So you got about, 70 degrees of swing before you get to that shoulder height. You know what I'm talking about?
The arms, when you're running, go forward and back. So one arm is always back. So when you're preparing for the double arm shift, you just, instead of bringing it forward in the penultimate, you leave it back and the other one goes back to join it. It sounds complicated, but you get this alternate elbow going back as you run. You hold it, one of your arms back and the other goes back to join it. And then you've got the position you're describing with the elbows behind and prepared for the double arm shift. And I would just say that one of the most crucial aspects of elite jumping is the outside arm with the elbow back is one of the key features. Even if you don't do a double arm shift, it's one of the key features of a long plant stride and lean back on plant. If you take your outside elbow, if it's withdrawn, and a lot of people do it naturally, but if it's withdrawn strongly, the upper body is taken back, the plant stride is long, you create a block and you go vertical. So the double arm shift accentuates that because you want both elbows back. But even if you don't do the double arm shift, you'll see most elite high jumpers, the outside elbow is withdrawn anyway, and it needs to be for high jumping because it sets up the lean back position on a long plant stride, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, yeah, I need to listen to it a couple of times, but it's quite an unnatural position though when you try and do it. Like for 2 arms to go back simultaneously, yeah, it's like in the triple jump. I wanted to draw parallels with the triple jump, and we talked before about how Jonathan Edwards struggled to get in that double arm shift in the triple on this. I think it was a step phase, but you have a good story about him being on a bus and him saying something like, he struggled basically, but I mean, his
Yeah,
leverage. Yeah, yeah. Right.
I was the jumps coach at the Commonwealth Games for England in 1994, and he hadn't had his breakthrough at that point. He won the Commonwealths, I think, with about 17 meters, but he was lamenting the fact he didn't really know what he was doing. And he asked me whether Steve and I knew what we were doing, and I sort of said, pretty much, yeah. Then he got advice. He went to Tallahassee, actually, talking, off high jumper. He went to Tallahassee, found someone who knew what they were doing, and came back and broke the world record. So, and there are other elements to what happened to make his career take off at the age of 28.
28. Wow. Who was the guy in Tallahassee, or girl?
It was a guy. I mean, he was very religious at that time, and he was linked into religion when he visited Tallahassee. And this guy was some kind of minister or something. He also knew about triple jump. And
let's credit God, hey?
Yeah.
You're going to jump 1816 or 1829 or whatever it was. It's God, basically. It was a bit of a miracle jump, but it was actually interesting, bit of a tangent, but I was going to touch on psychology later, but I think Jonathan Edwards, I might be wrong in this, but I think he kind of withdrew from the religion thing later on and basically said, yeah, it was basically just positive psychology. Am I wrong in that? Or?
Well, the good Lord, he discovered that by not competing on a Sunday, which he refused to do, was costing him quite a lot of money. And I think he got a message from on above that it might benefit his bank balance if he jumped on a Sunday.
Yeah, which would benefit the world and the needy, and the less fortunate than him, or maybe him. Yeah, I find that fascinating because God is I don't want to go down this God path, but it's a big draw if you're a believer in God, whatever God you believe in. It's it's supernatural. So you're trying to do supernatural things. I mean, no one's ever jumped 1830 before, or no one's ever jumped 8 feet in the high jump apart from Sotomayor. So hey, yeah, it's bringing God. It is superhuman. So if it works for these guys, I say go for it. Whatever God you're going to choose, if you've got superpower behind you, yeah, go for it and put it down to whatever you want. Psychology was a topic of the discussion, but just in case a lightning bolt strikes you before the end of the conversation, I don't want to labor the psychology thing, even though, Olivia, I know it's super important. Not, I'm only kidding. Of course, it's super important. We all got to be very positive and go through all those drills, etc. But putting aside the God psychology thing, nutrition, which is also very controversial.
Can I just dwell on psychology for a minute?
Yeah, go for it.
Because if you take out pole vault, which is a bit of a weird thing, jumping high with a stick in your hand, if we eliminate that, high jump's the only event where you're confronted by the problem. It's the only event in athletics. You will come to a point where you look at the bar and say, I have never done this in my life. This is more than I have ever achieved, and I have to achieve that now. And that takes a special kind of guy to accommodate that. And there's a spectrum, I think, of jumpers that there's some that can't deal with it at all, and there's some that can deal with it relatively easily, and there's a whole mass in between. Steve Smith, I was lucky because he came from he actually went to the same school as Rooney, our footballer, at the School of Hard Knocks, streetwise kind of guys, and he did not respect the bar at all, and you could put it wherever you liked, and he would give it a go. I mean, I remember in training we'd do 220 and he'd knock it off. And what do you want, Steve? Oh, 223, he'd knock it off. 225, knock it off. 228, knock it off. 230, clear it. And he went into the World Juniors as an aside just to show what kind of a mind this guy had. He did this competition went on forever because it started at 214 or something. But he did a PB at 231, he did a PB at 233, he did a PB at 235, which was the biggest jump of the day. He did a PB at 237, all successive heights, because the the heights are predetermined, as you know, in the World Juniors, and it was going up in twos, and by which time it was absolutely knackered. But that kind of, to confront the bar at PB height and repeat and repeat and repeat and repeat is remarkable. I did have a well-known jumper who actually was Irish, dare I say it, for a while.
Well, I take responsibility for that competition taking the longest time possible, because I only jumped 2 meters. So I was the guy who started at the opening height and took, I think, 3 attempts to jump 2 meters. I was injured, I think, from memory. I genuinely was.
It's your fault he never did 240 then. But
possibly.
I had a jumper who could smoke 220 like Sotomayor, and you put the bar at 228 and it looked like he'd never jumped in his life. We all see those kind of athletes, and there is a case there for using psychology. I think there's a certain amount you can do as a coach to address that, and I have my little way of dealing with it. And we do we do insurmountable high jump work. In other words, I will say to the athlete, off 5 strides, I'm going to set this at a height you cannot achieve, and hopefully that has an effect where they say, I'll show you, you fat bastard, and it generates an attitude. But I do say to them, look, I don't necessarily expect you to clear it, but I do expect a respectable effort. I don't want to see you get anxious, crash through it, try to muscle it, all the things that ruin attempts at PB heights too often. So I set the bar at a height which I don't believe they can achieve, and I expect respectable effort. I mean, I watched a kiddie jump, only a novice at Trafford last year, and she was kind of 14 and hadn't achieved much. And the thing I took away from that, watching that youngster, the higher the bar went, the better she jumped. That is so rare. And she got better and better and better. I don't know what she did, 160 something or other, having never being a complete novice. And I thought, that's gold. That's a gift. If you haven't got the gift, you need to do something about it, because you're going to be confronted all the time by something that you've never done in your life. And when the pressure's on, you've got to do it. You've got to deliver. And that, when you're a long jumper, you can hair down the runway and give it your best shot. You don't see the task. You just jump as far as you can, but you're at the back of the fan and you're staring at this bar and saying, oh my God, and you've got to find a way of dealing with that. So psychology has a place, and you can do a certain amount as a coach to try and address it, but there may come a point where you need professional input.
Yeah, right. Very good. Very good. Well, this is about building the infrastructure, isn't it? What I call the infrastructure is, the facilities, the coaching, nutrition, psychology, the whole, I'm not sure how you feel about that actually, but were you a good collaborator, as a coach, or are you a good collaborator?
I know you really enthuse about the team. What you do need is help and assistance. Now, all too often, people, if you win the lottery and have someone who's going to be world class, there are a lot of people who want in. There are a lot of people who want to have on their CV, I worked with so and so. So their motives are wrong from the get-go. So you've got to be a bit careful when you have people who are confidants that get in the head of the athlete without you knowing it, or make suggestions, or why did you do that? They start meddling and interfering on something that's not in their remit. So by all means, you do need expertise across many areas. Soft tissue therapists, nutritionists, psychologists, agents, commercial agents, racing agents, medics, doctors, head of the governing body. They all want a slice. So when you're putting together a package, you've just got to try and work out the motives of some of these people, because they're not always honorable.
Okay, that's a good point. I'm just reflecting on that for a second. Imagine you're a person you thought you could add value to what you're doing. I'm a biomechanist, for example, and I think, oh, there's Mike Holmes. He's over there doing his thing. I think, even though I've never accomplished anything with a high jumper, I think he could benefit from me, and I could benefit from him. But mainly, I think he's a nice guy, and he's done well for the country, and I'm a proud Englishman or whatever. I'm gonna knock on his door and see if I can help him. Would you be receptive to that?
I think you've got to be, but you've got to be analytical about it and make judgments. And
okay, so it's an intuitive thing as well, is it? You're going to say, okay, yeah, you're a nutritionist, but is this more about me or you, or I wonder how you make that decision.
well, I'll tell you the thing that really does bug me, and we've sort of, I don't know if it's coming up, but we've kind of glossed over it, and that's strength and conditioning. Strength and conditioning, what the athletics fraternity has done, has sleepwalked into a situation where the strength and conditioning coaches or gurus have taken over the sport. There's a lot of people down, well, most of the coaches down on my track have never been in a gym. So through default, they subcontract the strength and conditioning. And let's face it, everything a jumper, an athlete does involves strength and conditioning, whether you're in a gym or not. So I don't like the phrase in the first place. And also, just as an aside, with our coaching badges, we get insurance in UK athletics, but not for work in a gym. You cannot do weight training and be insured in Britain. So every time you take an athlete into a gym and do weight training, you're flying by the seat of your pants. If an athlete gets injured, you could be sued, and there is no insurance. So there's a lot of things conspiring against what used to be the traditional coach taking control of strength and conditioning. Now, in my view, as you get elite and the technique gets developed, the person who runs and controls the strength and conditioning controls the athlete and their fortunes, because the ability to peak, and I'd like to perhaps, that's the thing that intrigues me most about coaching these days, is achieving your personal best on the very day and the very minute you need to, which I'd like to perhaps cover later. But whoever controls the strength and conditioning for elite athletes controls the athlete. And I've heard the likes of me being described as technical coaches now. We're not the coach, we're technical coaches, because there are various other coaches, and the S&C guy might be the one. So I would urge anyone to become familiar with the needs of what goes on in a weights room, and if they can. In Britain, there's the British Amateur Weightlifters Association courses you can go on. Nothing to do with UK athletics. They don't cover it. They're far too busy covering inclusion and diversity at the moment than worrying about performance. So get yourself out there and try and learn about what goes on in a gym, because having exploited your natural ability and reached your ceiling, if you want to go through the ceiling and hit the roof, going back to point number one, you have to do some of this work that Stefan Holm alluded to back in your Zoom call. So that's my rant about, you put a team around you, got an S&C guy, it's generic stuff. He probably gives you the same stuff as a badminton player. He may never have seen a high jump competition. He may never have, or she may never have visited a track. And yet you put your athlete in the hands of this person, and he may not know the difference between training in the weights room for a long jump and high jump. And I do, because one is far more sensitive to loading than the other, for example. So Yeah. If someone knocks on your door, you've got to make sure that it's the right person. They know what they're talking about.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, that's important. There's a lady in Scotland who's their leading high jumper, and apparently her partner is her strength and conditioning coach, or her partner is her coach dash strength and conditioning coach. But I don't know if it's her main coach or just her strength and conditioning coach. Have you heard of that lady?
Yeah. Yes, I know
Nikki
who you mean. The name eludes me at the moment, but it sounds like a pretty ideal setup.
Nikki Manson coaches Ray,
Yeah.
Bob Brown, Nikki.
She's achieving a great deal. And also, I mean, I spent a lot of time at Loughborough, which is supposed to be the center of the universe in Britain. I call it the black hole because astronomically, shining light goes into a black hole and nothing comes out. And I think that sums Loughborough up perfectly. And I dealt with some of the S&C guys in there, Dr. So-and-so and whatever, not a doctor, but PhD. I'm always wary about someone who uses the title doctor if they're not a medical doctor. But anyway, and the stuff they were giving, I mean, it would have suited hammer throwers, things like deadlifts and stuff like that, sluggish, double-footed nonsense. They were unfit for purpose, and they're English Institute of Sports Strength and Conditioning coaches. So it's a bit of a bloody minefield, frankly.
It is a minefield. So, okay, again, ideal world scenario. Ideal world. You've an 18-year-old who's just about to embark on a strength, like a gym strength program. What do you do? What's the solution? You're not insured. I mean, do you need to go in and do the strength and conditioning courses yourself to get insured and then become both? How do you manage that obstacle?
Well, that's an issue, Anton. And if we look around the UK at the moment, we haven't got anyone who can guarantee, just at the moment, in the men, getting over 220. For heaven's sake. I mean, Dalton Grant went to the Tokyo World Champs and opened his competition at 231 and cleared it.
Yeah.
Steve Smith went to Gothenburg and opened his competition in the Worlds in Gothenburg and opened the comp at 229. And this is 20, 30 years ago. So the pursuit of performance has taken a huge backseat in this country. And the answer is, I mean, Jonathan Edwards. I know how he got his strength and conditioning was done by the guy that I went to learn strength and conditioning from when I went to Newcastle pursuing a degree, but it was really pursuing athletics. 20 years on, he was using the same guy that I was introduced to, Norman Anderson. And he learned his trade in the weights room, did Jonathan. He was, for a skinny guy, he was as strong as an ox. Now these guys are, there's a few of them left in Britain, mostly old school kind of dinosaurs like me, who can probably accommodate this work. But the answer is, it's a gap. It's missing. It truly is missing. And I mean, if you were interested later, we could go into the kind of detail that is absent. You get people doing cleans and snatches, which I was part of the group that developed that in the 60s as power development for athletics. But we're 60 years on, 50 years on, where is the single leg rebound counter movement work in the gym? It's not done. There's a ton of stuff you can do in the gym that is high jump specific and nobody does it. It's bizarre, absolutely bizarre. So the answer is, don't let dinosaurs die out before you milk all the information you can get out of them.
Well, yeah, that's true.
I've not heard you silenced so readily in the past.
I'm reflecting. I think it's a very tricky one because sports science is a university discipline now, and strength and conditioning is a, is a career. So when you've
Yeah,
got an academic pursuit coupled with a career, then that's an authority on the subject. Now, you
yeah,
bring an authority to the subject to an event where that information is complementary. Yeah. And I mean, I'm trying to think of a good metaphor, and I pride myself on thinking of good analogies and metaphors. But let me see. A good one might be, well, a house might need a lick of paint, right? And you get a famous artist, and you say, "Well, I need my house painted," and they'll say, "Well, I've worked with paint my whole life. I'm an artist." And then they draw a picture of a swan on the front of your house with a sunset, and you're like, "I just wanted blue," or charcoal gray. And they're like, "Well, I'm an artist. This is what I do." The point I'm trying to make is that the artist is going to do whatever the hell he wants. That's a creative and artistic, but they're both called painters. The strength and conditioning guy can go down all sorts of paths and say, well, this is how you build strength. It could be hypertrophy, it could be the Arnold Schwarzenegger, muscle man thing, or it could be rugby league or rugby union strength. But it's just generic strength. Whereas really, really good strength and conditioning person would have a dozen different types of strength up their sleeve, from gymnasts to ballet dancers to high jumpers to the rugby league. The question is, does your master's degree in, sports science with a major in strength and conditioning cover that? I'd seriously doubt it, unless they spend significant time with people like your good self. I'd say that typically academics are probably a decade behind the real world. And I don't think that could be disputed. I mean, generally, the real world is the field test for experimental techniques in anything. And then the academic guys get wind of it, and they do experiments in a lab and, say, oh, well, it's been peer reviewed by a dozen smart people. And now it's fact, despite the fact that 10 years ago they were doing it in the field. My point is that as long as the strength and conditioning authority comes from a highly structured academic background, personally, I would question their authority when it comes to taking the reins of Katharina Thompson-Johnson or anybody on the basis of a strong resume. Meaning, there's two worlds. There's the academic world or the career world, and then there's what works world. When I was very, very young, when I was competing, we didn't care about the credentials of a physiotherapist, for example. We cared about what worked. So when we found a physiotherapist, when I was competing at a high level, we never would ask the question, did they study in this university? It was always, does the person work? You get better, That's all you cared about. So it could be a sheep shearer from New Zealand who's got a strong pair of hands and can break down scar tissue, is incredible with, massage or whatever. That's the person we'd see. I'd rather see a sheep shearer with strong hands and a good sports massage rather than someone with a PhD in sports massage. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is, if you're going to facilitate this collaboration, then you need to be very, very careful about the criteria, the assessment criteria based on outcomes rather than qualifications.
Yeah, I think that's very eloquently said. Can I just give you one quick example? Cleans and snatches, right? They are the go-to power exercise for athletes. Let me just put this to you. 1, it's double-footed. High jump is single-footed. 2, it's all concentric. There is no counter movement. 3, it's highly technical. 4, a woman would lift, say, 60 kilos, 65 kilos in a clean. That's 30 kilos per leg. Next, the speed of takeoff in a high jump is 150 milliseconds. The speed of a clean is double that. there is no counter movement, there is no eccentric movement. 30 kilos per leg is garbage. You can put an athlete in a certain machine, get them pinging with single leg with 200 kilos. When you plant in the high jump, it's something like 20 times your body weight. What's 30 kilos going to do of consent? You know, you're not even dealing with the collapsing forces in the clean and snatch. I rest my case. There are better ways these days of working it, but standard practice is cleans, well, not so much snatches, but cleans. And I've just explained why it takes a couple of years to get the technique. If you're 6'7", like your mate Danny Graham, you'll never achieve it anyway. It's garbage. Move on. So that's my issue. And if I walked in somewhere and I spoke to an S&C guy and they gave you a diet of cleans, I'd walk out.
That's interesting.
Simple as. And I would challenge anyone to shoot down the 4 or 5 points I've just made. The one thing that cleans does do, mind, it does strengthen the glutes. That has value, but you can do that in other ways.
I'm going to allow this pause for a few seconds for everyone to think.
Yeah. I mean, when you're in a gym, you've got to be specific. Counter movement. The high jump, you put your foot out. There's a tendency for your leg to fold. You've got to resist that. That's eccentric movement. Then you've got to straighten it. That's concentric movement. Get that done in the gym somehow. And there are various ways of doing it. And then you get people saying, for example, and I think Stephen Holmes said it, and I've in a couple of your Zoom things, what range should we do in squats, for example? Oh, we go arse to the grass. Why do you do that? Well, I don't really know. I like to work the full range. I'm thinking the full range of what? Squatting childbirth in the Serengeti Plains. What are you doing with your arse to the grass? You know, your leg only flexes, what?
20 degrees.
15, 20, 25 degrees. So if you're using 100 kilos of the deep squat, you could be using 350 kilos with a quarter squat in the range that relates to high jump. And Katrina Johnson-Thompson, albeit in a machine, was using 380 kilos for a quarter squat just below the flexion involved in the high jump for a set of 5. And she, she didn't do bad, and she's moved on from Liverpool, and she's not jumping as high now because I suspect that work's not going in. But you do full range squats, good for the glutes, but it's not addressing the range of the event and the loading that you can handle in that range, because the deeper you go, the lighter weight you use. And when you get off a deep squat into the range of high jump, you're underlifting. If you're looking for gross strength and not speed strength.
And he was quite proud of that ass to the grass thing. I mean, he emphasized it. He was emphatic that worked. And I remember being told before by somebody, I can't remember who it was, yeah, go deep, go deep. But usually, gym junkies, the guys who like hanging out in gyms, they're like, yeah, you got to go deep, man. Yeah, this quarter squat thing, no, forget it. Deep, 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 deep. I dismissed it at the time because I was from the school of, Mike Holmes. But yeah, listening to Holmes, I thought.
Look, Anton, it works the glutes. And that is a good exercise for the glutes, right? And I don't deny it. I do other stuff for the glutes, but in fact, I do have a glute machine when we do go to right down on our haunches. But we know that it's specifically for glutes, which are a valuable asset in high jump. And if you're working deep, you will gain in that respect. But if you're expecting it to address other elements of high jump takeoff, with your plant leg, it doesn't do it. It's, you're underlifting. So yeah, by all means, you can do your deep stuff, but that should not be the sole squat exercise for high jump. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. I can see the value of it, and I do actually do some myself, but I do it with a specific purpose, and then I go on to the quarter squat stuff for other purposes.
Yeah, the kind of the core. I mean, the core priority type stuff, you know, is your shallow lifting. That's very interesting. I mean, that could be a whole dedicated talk, maybe for another time. But nutrition, Mike, really don't want to forget about nutrition. It's a hot topic, mainly because there's always a fear that people with eating disorders, both male and female, might react badly to advice that you need to be lean or trim or a particular weight or an appropriate weight for jumps, and consequently starve themselves or become bulimic or, you know, harm themselves in some way. So having mentioned that, I just want to ask your opinion about whether there's merit in encouraging an athlete to lose weight if it appears that they're overweight. However,
the hot potato at the moment, the hot potato. Look, the science is clear. If you apply a force to an object, a certain force, setting aside wind resistance, the lighter object will go further, faster, and higher. Fact. If a high jumper comes in and he weighs 100 kilos, the load on the plant leg is absolutely massive, and it probably can't be resisted, and the lighter athlete will prosper. That said, in Britain, the retired gymnasts have raised the issue of harassment, bullying, lack of safeguarding, and they relate to many aspects, from being trained hard to being told to get skinny. And we now have issues. The governing body of UK athletics has got rid of most of the people who know of anything about athletics recently, but they have put out an advert for 2 safeguarding case officers. What I'm building up to is the fact that I can foresee in the near future, anyone who advocates that an athlete loses weight will lose their coaching license. Fact, end of. They're moving in that direction. So, I mean, bearing in mind the science that for a given application of force, you will jump higher if you have less mass. How do you go about establishing that with an athlete? Well, I think it's a nightmare, frankly. The Germans, back in your day, I don't know if you remember, they used to chain smoke. Used to smoking away, and I'm thinking they're supposed to be athletes. Mind you, they only have to do 9 strides, so it doesn't matter if they can't breathe, because they're suppressing their appetite, right? Now you can overdo the process and get so skinny you can't apply force. So that's why I said for a given force, you know, you can lose weight to the extent you can't apply the given force, and that becomes counterproductive. But let's just look at the medics. It's not just eating disorders, and what it is as much as bulimia and so on. When a female athlete loses a certain amount of body fat, the body goes into an emergency situation, and the women lose menstruation. And in doing so, they mess up their hormones, and they lose the ability to take on calcium, and they get stress fractures or stress reactions. It's called amenorrhea. So you have ballet dancers, long distance runners, and people of that ilk who develop stress fractures and bone loss, and that's separate from the long-term eating disorders. So it is a nightmare. I mean, quite a lot of women I know have developed stress fractures in their feet, and I think they've been on the fringe of losing their menstruation and the estrogen that goes with it. So all this goes on, and then, I mean, I have an athlete who has taken it upon themselves without any input from me whatsoever to go skinny to the point it was clearly damaging their athletics, and you're actually trying to plump them back up because it's that counterproductive. The answer at the moment, Anton, is there isn't an answer. It's a minefield. And
it's a balance. It's a balance. I mean, I don't know why I have to use this word again and again and again, but like people seem to have lost track of balance. You know, not too heavy, not too light. It's a no-brainer.
Athletes are driven creatures. Some of them will take it upon themselves to do it of their own volition, and you have no control over it. And as you say, it is balance. But just talking about going away from the body weight thing to basic nutrition. High jumpers are lucky. It's a lazy man's, lazy woman's event, comparatively speaking. People might get offended by that, but you're not a decathlete, you're not a 10K runner, you're not a marathon runner, and it's you can get by with a lot lighter loading than not loading, but intensity of training. But the one thing that, you know, go to a nutritionist for sure, but you should know the basics as a coach. For example, if you're going in a gym, protein, taking on board protein, if you're going in a gym, for example, and you're doing a 2-hour workout, there is obviously protein is the muscle building group of amino acids. You have a golden window, for example. You should kind of know this kind of stuff, that it used to be 30 minutes to 60 minutes when it was optimum to take on protein after a heavy workout. They're questioning whether that should be extended to 2 hours. But there is a golden window, and they call it an anabolic window. So when the UK athletes came off the track at major championships, the doctor would immediately shove a bottle of protein shake in their hands before they'd even got their spikes off to try and repair and recover. So make yourself familiar with this kind of information. And also, for example, you can only ingest productively about 25 grams of protein at any one hit. So it's no good stuffing yourself with Christmas turkey, all elements and trimmings, because it won't be effective. And how much protein should you take as an athlete? Have you got any views on that?
No, I don't.
Right. Here's a view for you. It varies between 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight to 1 gram of protein per kilo of body weight, which is a factor of 2.2. But if you're somewhere in the middle, you won't go far wrong. So if you can only ingest 25 grams a time, you probably need 4 sets of 25 grams over a day just to get the protein in a high training period. Apart from that, in our event, you know, I think I just recommend the Mediterranean diet, which is the healthiest diet on the planet by all accounts. But another aspect is competition, sustaining. I mean, some of the top high jump competitions go on for 2.5 hours. You know, the better jumpers have the harder task. I mean, in combined events, the ones who can't jump very high, they do their 165 and they go off to the restroom, happy days. 2 hours later, the Katharinas and the Tiams of this world are still there. And that's when the business end of the event goes on, and they've got to sustain their energy for that kind of period. So there are aspects of sort of maintaining energy throughout a long competition as well that I think the coach needs to take on board.
Excellent, excellent. Now I'm conscious it's very late over there, Mike. For any viewers, Mike, it's the middle of the night over there. It's about 2 a.m. or something crazy like that. So I do thank you sincerely, because this is extremely valuable information. The purpose of this whole talk is to glean little nuggets of wisdom from people who have got an incredible track record in the event, which you do, Mike. And I think people will be very appreciative of it, for the simple reason that it's a hard time right now. And a lot of kids in the community who people just want to help improve. And my feeling is that you might as well do it right, because there's a lot of people doing it wrong. And you don't want to be in that group. It's staggering how many people just make it up as they go along. And that's the modus operandi of a lot of people. Just say, oh, high jump, long jump over, whatever, let's just make it up as we go along. But they don't have to, particularly in this age of social media, etc. Last thing I'd like to talk about, Mike, is peaking. If you've got time, you were brilliant at peaking and the importance of recovery. Just how important is recovery, and what does recovery mean for you? What is recovery? What is that?
This is the thing that fascinates me most about coaching. Frankly, the biggest gift you can give an athlete is to guarantee, and I use the word guarantee, an athlete that they will be in shape to do their lifetime best, or for a seasoned athlete, the season's best, on the very day and the very hour that they need to. And by that, I mean, it can be at any level you like, really, but we know when the Olympic final high jump is going to be, for example, right? And it's, the start time, and you can guess the finish time. As a coach in September, you have to be able to guarantee your athlete that they will be in the shape of their life on that day, on that hour. And that's the thing that really fascinates me. You don't have to be an Olympic athlete. You could be, aspiring to be the English schools champion, for example. And the same thing applies. So obviously we know that to program a peak, you work back from the end point. But it starts in September or October when you start winter training. I mean, take Katerina. I mean, as an aside, we wanted to target, or I wanted to target, the British high jump record indoors, which was 195. So we set about that in September, and because I like to do damage to individual eventers, you get a combined eventer, coming out doing a 697 meter long jump or a 197 high jump. It amuses me, actually. So, we agreed that we would task this, and the indoor champs was the middle of Feb. So we geared most of the winter to that end, and we achieved that on year one, and we wanted to repeat that on year two. So we did 196 in mid-February, and next year we did 197 in mid-February. But it's not random. Everything has to be subservient to that task. The competitions, the taper out, the whole thing has to be governed by that date and how you get there. I remember Steve Backley, he did a phenomenal training in South Africa in January. He did about 91, 92 meters in javelin. And everyone said how fantastic it was. And I said, that's so sad. And people say, what do you mean so sad? He said, because he won't win, and he won't beat Jan Zalesny in the summer, and he didn't. So it's, if you're gonna produce a peak when you want it, you have to be prepared to go to the depths of despair at some points leading up to that, and accept that that is part of the process. If you can jump high when you don't need to, you're not training hard enough. It's simple as. I remember, Steve Smith, he needed about 6 weeks or 2 months of tapering out to achieve good high jumping, and it required some what we called garbage competitions. I mean, there might have been diamond leagues, and he could go there and earn a bit of money, but he would only be doing 228, 230, because we knew that down the line he'd do 237 when he'd tapered out. We did a GB USA match, for example, in Edinburgh back in the days when such things, were on the calendar, and he did 215 on a wet, cold day. And he was in the stands in June crying. You know, I've got the Worlds in Stuttgart, the end, you know, beginning of August, and I've just done 2:15. I said, what's the solution, Mike? I said, well, what are we going to do now, Steve? Everything's, you know, in the bank. The money's in the bank. You've earned it. But if we're going to peak, you've got to start doing nothing. You've got to be happy doing nothing between now and Stuttgart. And he went there and did 2:37 for the bronze. I mean, that was in the day when 2:37 only got you the bronze. I mean, you'd be a world hero now if you're doing 2:37. But the point is that high jump is very sensitive to loading and work. So when I say do nothing, I mean no loading. You do strides, you do jumps, but you wouldn't be in the weight room, you wouldn't be doing plyometrics, because all that money's in the bank. People don't realize that when you gain strength, it decays at the 1/3 of the rate of gain. So if Katerina does 380 kilos on the squats and then leaves those in April as the strongest high jump woman in the world, possibly, and by August, she's only capable of doing 350, she's still the strongest in the world. And she hasn't been in the weight room because the strength doesn't decay at the same rate as, say, cardiovascular fitness. So once you get your head round that doing nothing at the right time is the best gift you can give to an athlete, and once they buy into that, you're on the way to achieving peak. I mean, high jump's a strange event. I mean, I've been lucky to go across all, you know, so many events, and it's not even comparable to a long jump, because long jump requires so much speed. That's the biggest factor. The one who runs fastest probably jumps the furthest. It doesn't apply to high jump. So the taper out is different for high jump and long jump, for example. High jump, you can damage high jump by, you know, Steve Smith went to a national squad in the winter and he couldn't get off the floor. And he was heartbroken. And I said, that's sensational, mate. So why? I said, it shows you're training hard, but there'll come a time when you can stop that. You can come out of it. You'll retain all the qualities that you built up, and you'll start to fly. And that's the process. It only works if you're a really, really hard trainer, because if you're not training hard and you rest long, you're retired. It's retirement. So this process only works for someone who really knocks the nails in the coffin in the winter, and gets into such a position that the legs are like tree trunks and nothing's working. Once you get in that state, you cannot, you stay away from competition and you avoid putting yourself out there. And it's only you and your coach knows what state you're in, because you know that down the line, once the load comes off, you're going to fly. You really are going to fly. So tapering out for high jump can be weeks, absolutely weeks. And one of the problems with high jump, well, with coaches, it's their destiny to coach. I mean, I went to the world champs indoors in Poland. I was rooming with a guy. I won't mention his name. He's very prominent. And Kat was resting up. You know, I gave her the normal week off before a major. And the day before this guy's athlete went into competition, he was in the gym. I said, what are you doing? She's competing tomorrow. Oh yeah, we're doing activation. I thought, what the hell's activation? Because that's only been recently invented, activation.
Yeah, I've heard about it.
Yeah, well, what it is, it's dealing with coaches' insecurity. Do you know what? If we don't train, we're gonna get detrained. It's all gonna ebb away. So we better go in and do some activation. And nobody really knows what it is. But what it is it's dealing with the coach's insecurity. But just in case, we better go and do something. I'm just so nervous. So, you know, you don't dig up a seedling and look at it, see how it's getting on. You believe that it's going to happen. It's going to sprout. Well, once the athlete buys into this process, and especially high jump's the one where this process works better than ever. Train hard and rest long, and do nothing at the right. Be happy to do nothing at the right. Bed rest at the right time. I mean, I had two high jumpers I was working with. they missed the Olympics at Sydney. They both went on holiday it was late August. They went on holiday. They came back. They did a GB B international, and they both set the Olympic standard, which they'd missed in the summer. They'd been on holiday for 3 weeks. They came back and did 193 at that time. Was the Olympic qualifier. Neither of them had trained, and I've got so many anecdotes like that. So it only works if you've really put the work in. Because, as I say, if you don't put the work in and you rest for a long time, you're actually a retired athlete. But does that kind of?
Yeah, absolutely. We had a big success with Thomas Barr at the Rio Olympics 5 years ago now. But I kind of added 2 and 2 together on that one because he had been injured. He'd been injured for a bulk of the year. And that's a fact. I mean, there's no denying. I mean, anyone who knows his training situation before Rio will know that Tom Barr was injured for the bulk of 2016. He was. In fact, I was at his coach's house, Haley and Drew Harrison, just before the Olympics, because I was going to go over, and they said, yeah, it's touch and go, whether he compete. Touch and go. No, what do you mean? He said, well, he's been injured for a long time, meaning he missed a bunch of training, and yeah, it was dragging on and on and on. He had a terrible year. And he had a good winter, apparently. That's what I gleaned. And I immediately thought of your theory on that for high jump. But he went to Rio with very little training under his belt. However, he got in the aerobic stuff. So he was a light guy. He is a light guy. He's a very slim guy. But he got in the aerobic stuff, and he'd done all the strength and hardcore kind of conditioning stuff. But by the time he got to Rio, it was falling into place. It was like maybe the temperature or something, this training camp they went on or something. It started clicking. So he just built up the aerobic stuff again. And yeah, he smashed the Olympics. He was the freshest guy in the arena. He was fresh. He was raring to go. He ran 47 seconds, 47 something in the final, finished fourth, just missed out in the medal. But he won his semi-final at the Olympics, and he dominated. He dominated. He was light in his feet. He was fresh. He was hungry. But I was there. I was in the front row at the stadium. I couldn't help but think, oh, this is a fresh athlete. He's in no way tired. No way. I put it down to that. I put it down to a guy who was just bursting to run because he'd been held back. But he'd had the previous year to that, he had a good few years of conditioning in his legs. And then suddenly, like John Edwards in 95, 94, 95, when he had that injury, he had this forced rest. You talk about that forced rest. John Edwards was injured in 93. Was it 90? He was injured before 95. 1 year he was out.
Just jump in there, because I was going to mention Jonathan Edwards, because when he had his breakthrough, all the coaches, we got him into a lecture room in Stoke, one of these amphitheaters, and he was sitting down there on the desk. So, right, Jonathan, tell us how it happened. You were a 17-meter guy. Now you're 1829, 1843 windy. How did it happen? And he kind of looked up and said, I haven't got a clue. But when they penetrated the situation deeper and asked questions, what happened was he was that fed up at the age of about 28 or whatever. He's semi-retired. He stopped training that winter. He'd had 10 years with Norman Anderson back in Newcastle in the weights and all that. And he was a hell of a athlete in the weight room for a skinny guy. He said, yeah, I packed up. I'd had enough. I came out and did some sprints in February. And I went to the 3A's, the Loughborough match, the international Loughborough match. And I jumped out of my skin. And there's a case in point. It's an extended period of training, an extended rest, a bit like your 400-meter guy. And, he took off from then. But it was a period of semi-retirement and some fast sprinting in the spring. And suddenly he was 1829. Remarkable. But people hear these things. They don't build it in to their programs. But it's so easy. You have to get the athlete to buy into this, because someone like yourself, you're not happy unless you're doing stuff, self-destructing really. And if you had a rest day, you'd go off and bloody play tennis, for example. I seem to remember. But people,
I actually, my best performances, I did rest. I mean, I do distinctly remember resting. I remember being in the Canaries in April '94 and feeling flat, and you saying exactly what you said a short while ago, which was, yeah, that's good, it's the sign you've trained. And May, I was still pretty rugged. By June, I was coming out of it. And I remember before the Cork City Sports, where I jumped 221 at 18, I was in bed. I mean, did the bed rest thing. I was full on recovery. I was like a bloody cancer patient. I was just in bed all the time. And then suddenly, you get out of bed and, you're bouncing off the walls, And also at the end of '96, I had peaked too late. And I remember it was September. The season had finished. And I was in Germany because I was studying German. And I remember bouncing off the walls. I'll always remember, I was in this apartment in Germany. I was living in an apartment in Frankfurt. And I couldn't get a competition. I mean, it was all finished, but I'd stopped everything. I was a month stopped, and I had all this jumping in me. I was literally bouncing around with all this incredible elastic strength with no competition in sight. And it was approaching October. So I timed it wrong. That was '96.
There's a little short phrase, and it's one I like. Training is destructive. Yeah. When you train, you break your system down, and it's adaptation, so it rebuilds and can take more loading next time. So you go and train again to gain the adaptation. You put a heavier load on, you break your system down, it repairs, and you're capable of lifting more or competing at doing more work intensively. And that's a step process, but it's a continuum of breaking down, repair, breaking down, repair, breaking down, and the taper just extends that. And you just alluded as well to how it works. Whether you kind of built that in the future after that as part of your way forward, I don't know. But people hear these stories and they just ignore them. It's bizarre to me. Absolutely bizarre. If you get the timing right, you can guarantee a special performance. You can guarantee it. And then, what greater gift can you give an athlete?
Absolutely. Recovery, absolutely. Mike, it's late. You got to get some sleep. You've been a superstar. Really appreciate it. Again, the Patriots, big up to the Patriots. Massive season. What do you learn from the Patriots? American football.
The Patriots, look, the National Football League is designed so you have 8 wins and 8 losses for every team. It's a level playing field. And yet they've had a 20-year dynasty. And how that happened is really fascinating to me. And I got the book called The Dynasty to try and figure out how the coach and the team achieve the impossible. And that's dominate a sport, which is set up so you cannot possibly dominate the sport. And that's why I love the Patriots, mate, because they've achieved the impossible. And it's a fascinating insight into how that can happen when the system is designed to make it impossible. Fascinating.
You need the system, don't you? The system is important.
Well, it was coaching, and there's a miserable old coach. I'm probably mirroring myself. He's probably my role model, and I apologize for ranting tonight because once I get something, I do tend to lose the plot. And
not at all.
Apologies for that.
It was fantastic. It was fantastic. Really great insights. I think it's gospel. Gospel according to Mike, but it's gospel to me. It's universal. I don't think a lot of your points you could debate with any degree of, criticism. You could question things. You can say, I'm not sure about this. I'm not sure about that's fine. But I think when you're tried and tested, when you're proven, then I think any jury would say, yeah, I'm quite happy with some of those theories. but it was very, very useful, very, very useful. I'm very glad we've got it recorded. So anybody who finds it particularly useful, send us an email, and you can send me an email and I'll pass on any questions. But we'll be sure to not blitz Mike with too many questions. Mike, I'll go to bed. Thank you so much for that. It was magic. Really, really appreciate it.
You're welcome, and I hope it strikes a chord here and there with some people.
Sure it will. I've absolutely no doubt.